you pray with me, please? Holy God, thank you for bringing us together tonight. I ask that the words of my mouth, the meditations of all of our hearts, be acceptable to you, our rock and our redeemer. Jesus, in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. So the reading that we started off with is from Ecclesiastes, and it's really cheerful. It's full of hope, it's dire, it's absolutely extraordinary. Thomas Wolfe wrote, "Of all I have ever seen or learned, that book seems to me to be the noblest, the wisest, and the most powerful expression of man's life upon this earth, and also the highest flower of poetry, eloquence, and truth. I'm not given to dogmatic judgments in the matter of literary creation, but if I had to make one, I'd say that Ecclesiastes is the greatest single piece of writing I've ever known, and the wisdom expressed in it, the most lasting and profound." And it's true that Ecclesiastes has had a huge impact on Western literature and culture, because it contains lots of phrases and ideas that we've picked up over the years. Eat, drink, and be merry. That's from Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That's Ecclesiastes. A fly in the ointment. That's Ecclesiastes. There's a time for everything under the sun. That's Ecclesiastes. Cast your bread upon the waters. Also Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun. That's Ecclesiastes. And there's more and more and more. But it's really curious how Ecclesiastes got into the Bible, because nobody really knows. And I've done quite a bit of research, and it's kind of a bit of a mystery. Some people think that because the book was named for Solomon, that perhaps just his name was enough to get the book put into the Old Testament. But the reality is that there were lots of books that were attributed to Solomon, some of them probably written by Solomon, that didn't make it. So why Ecclesiastes? It's certainly not the case that the theme in Ecclesiastes fits with the rest of the Old Testament. It's not about redemption. It's not about God's saving love or God's saving grace. It's really depressing. And it's really kind of pointless. So why is it there? Why is it? And it's in what's called the wisdom writings. So you'll find it in your Bible along with Proverbs and the Psalms and the Song of Solomon, although that's a different story. So why would it be called wisdom writings as well? Most of you are probably aware that I deal with mental illness and live with mental illness. And since this is Mental Health Awareness Month, I really wanted to talk a little bit about that tonight. So some of the things that I had to deal with, one of them is OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, which reminds me, this has been driving me I've been known to sit in a house and look at a picture that's just off the but usually the way it manifests itself is if I'm really stressed, I count. So if you ever see my fingers moving at the side of my leg, it's because I'm counting all the letters in words, in sentences, adding them together, taking them away, and that maths in my head helps me to kind of calm down. That's one of the ways that it exhibits itself. The other way is that I completely forget whether I've locked doors. So, for example, there were a number of occasions I would lock the door here, I'd lock that one, I'd lock that one. We'd get home and I'd say to Chris, "Did I lock the door?" And Chris would say, "Yes, of course you did." And I'm like, "Did you see me?" He's like, "Well, no." So in my car I come back. Of course the door's locked. The same with work. Exactly the same thing happened. I would leave work at night. There was a back door and a front door. And I'd check the back door, make sure it was locked, check the front door, walk to the car, and the car's usually parked at the top of the hill. So I walk all the way up the hill, get to my car, and then think, did I lock the front door? Maybe you didn't. So at that point, I'll trottle all the way back and I'll check. Well, actually, that's what I used to do. But recently, I've found a trick. I've found something that works for me. And what I do now is, when I've locked a door, especially an important one like here at the day centre or at work, then before I leave, I put something in front of the door. Not really, but in my imagination, I put something in front of the door. So it started off, I would put boxes of fruit and vegetables. So I'd have a box of grapes, and they'd all be in those little packets, you know, or a box of strawberries, and they'd all be in the little punnets, or a box of pineapples, and they'd all be there with gold with the green tops on, or I'd leave a box of apples, and you'd see this open box. And oddly enough, I'd get back to the car, and I'd still think, did I leave the door open, or did I lock it? And the thing is, I still can't remember whether I've locked the door, but I can remember that I left something in front of it. So I then moved on from boxes of fruits and vegetables, that's where it started, and then I moved on to giant fruits and vegetables, so I'd leave a giant pineapple, or a giant mango, or a giant something in front of the door. And one day, I decided to leave a box of crabs in front of the door, and as I was leaving, they chased me down the hallway, so I turned round and left something else, because when you've got a really active imagination, it can work against you. And in my head, there were these crabs running around at work, and I thought, can't have that. So instead, I went back and put something else. The other day, it was a rocket ship. On Friday, it was a giant Savoy sausage. One by the back door and one by the front door. Now, I couldn't for the life of you tell you if I locked the door or not. I can't remember whether I locked the door. But I can remember, oddly enough, that I left a 6-foot Savoy sausage in front of the door. And that's how I do it. But that's OCD. And of course, there are other things, there are other ways in which it manifests itself. And talk to Chris, he'll tell you all about those. I'm also severely dyslexic. Fortunately, computers are an absolute grace, because typed words somehow sit in my brain much better than handwritten words. So when I'm typing, and of course spell check is an absolute godsend, except when I've spelt a word wrong and there is a word that spells that way, yeah, in which case, you know, we've all had those. But when I was at school, I got an A+ in technical drawing. I got an A in rural studies. I got an A in related studies. I got an A in maths, and I got a U, which is unclassified, in English. And I was told it was because I didn't work hard enough, and my parents were told it's because I didn't work hard enough. But this was back in the 70s. Nobody really understood dyslexia, and they couldn't work out why does he try so hard here and not so hard there. And the problem with that is that, for me, I grew up thinking there was something wrong with me. And I don't just mean I had some kind of mental illness which made it very difficult for me to write. I really thought there was something wrong with me. And of course, growing up gay, that was doubly so. Because I was told that people who were gay, there was something wrong with them, that they chose to be gay, and therefore there was just something not right with them. They just weren't like everybody else. There was something not right. So I had a double whammy. I'm like, you know, I'm just not right. There's something wrong with me. I have neuralgia. The neuralgia hits when I'm stressed, and it's kind of like, it's like the worst toothache you can imagine. It kind of starts at the top of my head, runs down the side of my face to my neck. If I've ever missed church, then it's been because of neuralgia. And what happens is it hits when I'm stressed. So I just have to be careful. The problem is that my brain doesn't understand the difference between stressed because we're putting on a festival, or I'm you know, have some challenge at work, or we're going on holiday. So last year I got all excited because we were going on our very first cruise. What happened? Wham! Neuralgia. Stuck in bed, and we couldn't go. I was just ill for the time before we were due to go. So it's a real pain, but it's all part and parcel of the same thing. I'm also bipolar. Now, bipolar disorder, I don't know if you know anything about it. Yeah, Tony came up to me early and gave me a bipolar bear joke, not realising, which I thought was funny. But there are different types of bipolar disorder. So, for example, there's bipolar 1, which means that you have times when you have mania, and then you have kind of times of depression. So instead of your mood being like this, it's kind of like this. So that's bipolar 1. Then you've got bipolar 2, and then you have, with bipolar 2, you have periods of depression, which are quite long periods of depression, but they're broken up by quite short periods of hypomania. And invariably, it doesn't cause too many problems in day-to-day life. It's just a real challenge to work with. Then you've got cyclothymic disorder, or cyclothymia, which basically means that somebody has had a hypomanic or a depressive episode, and the low moods in that can affect, but again, it's kind of, it means that somebody's either depressed, very slightly depressed, or slightly manic, slightly depressed, but it's quite a narrow band, and people cycle through it. Whereas bipolar 1 and 2, you have a period of depression, then a period when everything's all right, then a period of mania, then a period where everything's all right. So that's the difference. Then you've got rapid cycling bipolar. This is where you have 4 or more depressive, manic, mixed or hyper episodes in a year. So for some people, they might only have 1 or 2 depressive incidents in a year, in which case they fall into the type 1 and type 2. If they have rapid cycling bipolar, then it can be a day or even a few hours, and somebody's way up here and then way down there, and that's the rapid cycling bipolar. And then you've got mixed bipolar state, which is me, and that's symptoms of mania and depression at the same time, and that's a mixed bipolar state, which means that when I'm at my worst, when I'm really, really depressed, that's invariably when I'm the most productive. So when I'm really depressed, I lock myself in the bedroom, don't want to see anybody. I like to have a room that's at least another door away from the front door, so and not the living room. So invariably it's a bedroom or a spare room, and I'll kind of put myself away in there, and I'll work. But that's when I do my best writing. That's when I do my best studying. It's like my brain, even though and at some points I can be suicidal, but at the same time, my brain's churning out this really good work and does this really good stuff. So unlike bipolar 1 and 2, which is kind of like this is a really interesting state where you're both high and low at exactly the same time. And that's what I deal with. So I have times when I just need to say to Chris, I need some time away, and I'll go and lock myself in the bedroom and make myself a little nest on the bed with some pillows and take my PC in there and start working. And usually I'll have the TV on in the background, and I can do that for days and get some really good work done. So on the one hand, it's an absolute pain, but on the other hand, it's really useful. That's my bipolar disorder. So, back to Ecclesiastes. One of the challenges I found with bipolar disorder is that, especially when I'm in that place, I see things in very black and white terms. So I see things in extremes, and I can't see anything in the middle. It's like I've got a blind or a blinker on for the stuff in the middle. So I wrote an example here. For example, if I was to ask you if you'd like a cup of tea, and you said to me, if you're having one, then on a good day, I'd simply assume that this was a phrase that meant, yes please, thank you for thinking of me. But on a bad day, I can't access that part of my brain that does the translating, which is the reasoning bit, and my brain goes into a meltdown. Because I can't work out, does that mean you want a cup of tea or not? Because anything other than yes or no kind of sends me into this tailspin. Do you mean you don't want a cup of tea, but you feel the kind of accepted protocol to say yes and be social? Does it mean that you do want a cup of tea but don't want to put me out? Is your answer about tea at all? Do you really prefer something else? Should I ask you if you would like something else? What if I don't have what you want then though? Should I offer you an alternative anyway and just hope that I have whatever you want? Or should I say, would you rather have a coffee? But then what if you say, if you're having one again? Because I'm not fond of coffee. I don't like coffee. So I want to have a cup of tea. Does that mean that I feel obliged to have a cup of coffee because that's what you want to have? Do I have to have coffee or do I have tea? And all of this happens while I'm stood in front of somebody who's thinking, what's wrong with him? Because all they said was, yeah, I'll have a cup of tea if you're making one. And my brain's just gone poof, and absolutely crashed. Ecclesiastes. Again, when I was young, I really did think that there was something wrong with me. And I don't mean that I was living with a mental illness. I'm not talking about that kind of wrong. I'm talking about the kind of wrong that we sung about in the second song, where people think there's something wrong with their soul, that their soul is just bad, or there's something missing from it. That was the kind of wrong that I felt. But when you read Ecclesiastes, you read about somebody who is living with a mental illness. You can see it in what's written. You can see it in the depression. You can see it in the lack of faith. You can see it in the dark soul of the night. You can see it in the way that the person writes, and the person's just given up. I don't know what life's about. It's just got no meaning, and everything's just so boring, and I just don't understand what it's all about, and I've lived my life and it's all so pointless. And you read all of this and you think, and this was Solomon. This was somebody that God loved. This was somebody who was given the privilege of building the temple in Jerusalem, the very first temple. This is the person who was called the wisest man that ever lived. And people would come from all around the world to ask advice and ask favors. And here's this man writing from this point of very severe depression. There's nothing wrong with you if you're living with a mental illness. It just means you're living with a mental illness. And that's what I get from Ecclesiastes. And that's why I think it was left in there. Because what it does is it reminds us that that being human is not just about all the great things we do and the wonderful things we do. It's about all the bad things that we have to deal with, and the bad things that we have to live with, and the situations that we don't like or don't want. And they're just as much a part of our humanity. They're just as much a part of who we are in relationship with God as anything else. Is it a pain? Yeah. But in Ecclesiastes, this strange little book reminds me that it's okay to feel this way. That God is still with me, and that I'm still a part of something magnificent and awesome. Even if I don't feel it in the moment, just as Solomon didn't.